And good morning, everybody. Peggy Berryhill at KGUA in Wallala 88.3 FM. And I am so excited this morning. I've been looking forward to this day for decades, really. But my dear friend and award-winning journalist, author of this book, we're going to be talking about it, Crossing Bridges, Crossing Borders, Building Bridges, the one and only Maria Martin. Good morning, Maria. You there?
Good morning to you, Peggy. Can you hear me?
Oh my goodness.
Way over in Wallala?
I'm in Gualala, that wonderful voice. Well, hang on. We got to take care of a little bit of weather and things, and we'll be right back. That award-winning voice, Maria Martin. I could listen to Maria all day. She's one of my favorite producers and just a great voice. So we'll be talking about her book and a little bit about her history, all kinds of things. I just want to remind you about the weather today. We've got blue skies this morning, looking pretty good out there. The ocean is pretty mild as it was yesterday. Currently it is not 80 degrees outside. Something's wrong with my outside thermometer. But just you're going to have to take my word for it. It's going to be a nice day, probably in the high 50s here up and down the coast. Slight wind at about 5 miles per hour, and it might kick up a little bit higher than that. But it's a very, very nice day today. All right. I think that is about it. Just let's continue to be careful. We understand Sonoma County is moving into the next tier, which means a lot of openings. But still, we've got to keep wearing our masks, be careful. I know we're all excited. I too have been participating in giving people hugs with my mask on. Still got my mask on. Hey, Maria, check this out. This is the latest in Native American COVID wear. It's a lanyard for your mask. A beaded
that's
lanyard.
great.
Get that
I have a short one, not a Native American.
My friend Kathy Catman, you probably remember Kathy. She sent that to me.
But I do have, a native Guatemalan mask.
Oh, I'm jealous. Beautiful. Of course you do. And we are talking, you should know that we're talking with Maria. She lives in Antigua, correct?
I live in Antigua, not the island. Some people get it mixed up, but Antigua, the colonial capital of Guatemala, about an hour away from Guatemala City, and a beautiful place to be. And I notice on your wall, in the back of one of your shoulders there's a calendar, and to me, it looks like Lake Atitlan in Guatemala. I don't know, I could be wrong, but there's these
it doesn't say, but it could be, and you're right, it does look like that. I've seen the photos. I hadn't put it together. Isn't it wonderful? So we have a little bit of that volcano. I remember meeting some Hawaiians several years ago, and we were in the desert southwest where there are old cinder cones, and the native Hawaiians said, "Oh, we feel so at home now. We feel like our ancestors were here as well." And so I'm sure, these Pacific Rim people, a lot of the people on those volcanoes say a lot. I want to play, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, just wanted to say that yes, the volcanoes are the connection that we have, the volcanoes and the earthquakes, along this Pacific coast, that Guatemala has some 33 volcanoes, 3 of which are active right now.
Wow.
And one of them is particularly active. And unfortunately, the same kind of syndrome of lack of disaster preparedness and the impact of whatever kind of disaster or climate change that has on the poorest, the most humble, the humble people who in many cases, are losing homes or losing agricultural fields because of the volcano, and then don't even have um, enough announcements from the government or an evacuation plan. So it's just a sad thing here that one sees over and over with climate change, with disasters that happen, that it's the impact on the poorest. And in Guatemala, the poorest are over 70% of the population.
Mm. We just jumped into our conversation here because we haven't seen each other in so long, and it's so wonderful to be together. For those of you who might not be familiar with Maria, let me give a little listen to this. I don't think we're going to listen to the whole thing, but this is a little bit of Maria from January 19th on NPR. And where are you?
Support for NPR and the following message come from the Michigan Economic Development Corporation.
I'm going to move past the ad here, message from their sponsor. And
Central America has suffered from the pandemic and from two big hurricanes. So it's not too surprising that thousands of migrants are seeking better conditions in the north. A large group of people from Honduras made it across the border to Guatemala, and for some, Mexico would be next. Beyond that, the border of the United States. Journalist Maria Martin is in Antigua, Guatemala, and joins us now with the latest. Good morning.
Good morning, Steve.
What has happened at the Honduras-Guatemala border?
Well, what's been going on for the last 2 days is that maybe as many as 9,000 migrants were able to get through the border this weekend when their numbers overwhelmed security guards at the border. So many of these migrants are young men carrying nothing but a small backpack, but there are also families, women pushing strollers with little babies, and some older people in wheelchairs. For most of Monday, there was a standoff between the Guatemalan security forces and the migrants who were blocking a major highway between the two countries. And the migrants were given an ultimatum to move. Now the Guatemalan government says that the migrants have been dispersed. Some have been transported back to Honduras, and others have broken off from the main group and are trying to make their way north to Mexico, then to the US. But the Mexican government vows not to let the migrants enter their territory.
These sound like the actions of desperate people. What conditions are they fleeing?
They're very desperate people. They're very low income. They left this area in Honduras. And of course, Honduras is one of the poorest, most violent, most corrupt countries in the Americas, and one of the areas hardest hit by the two hurricanes that struck in October and November, and of course, by the pandemic. I spoke with Father Ismael Moreno, who runs an independent radio station in the region.
Con los huracanes, pero también con la pandemia.
With the hurricanes, says Father Mello, and with the pandemic, Hondurans were left without jobs, homes, with no opportunities to get ahead. So many of the migrants say there's nothing for them in Honduras, that they would be prepared to do anything, that faced with a life of misery, violence, and corruption in Honduras, that if they get sent back, they might try again.
Okay.
so that was Maria Martin and Steve Inskeep on January 19th, I believe, of this year. And a little bit, you will hear Maria many times on NPR, and you hear why she is an award-winning journalist, and she has been able to bring us the reality that we don't get behind the headlines and behind what little we know about why people are fleeing and coming to the United States. Thank you, Maria, for that report. You've been covering Latin America, which is huge, if I say Latin America, but primarily looking at border issues and people in Guatemala for many years now. Let's go back, though, a little bit, and I want to reintroduce you as the author of this new book, wonderful book, crossing borders, building bridges, and there's a little a picture of you there in front of Latino USA, and in front of one of those wonderful Neumann mics. You and I love mics, so we know that great mic. But let's go back even farther than that. Let's go to KBBF in Santa Rosa and
Yes.
Roanoke
Where
Park.
it all started, where it all started for me, where it all started for Latinos in public radio, and an effort to make public radio really public, something that you've been involved in for many, 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 many years as well.
Can you open your book to page 10?
Sure.
And I want you to just read a little bit on the paragraph that starts with one day in the mid-70s.
Sure. One day in the mid-70s, in the wine country of Northern California, I was absent-mindedly turning the radio dial when I heard something I'd never, ever heard before. It was in English and in Spanish. The station played reggae, rancheras, and dedicas, dedications on the oldie show, as well as covered public affairs. For the first time in my life, I heard media that reflected my reality as a bilingual and bicultural person of Mexican and American heritage. What I was listening to were the sounds of the very early days of KBBF, 89.1 on the FM dial in Santa Rosa, California, the first Latino-operated and owned public radio station. As Oprah would say, it was an aha moment. I was hooked on this little pioneering radio station and on making radio that cut across cultural lines.
And that is the beginning, because then she became a volunteer there and began what is now her wonderful career. We're so glad. And of course, KBBF is still doing outstanding work, as they have done in the fires and the PG&E outages and everything. They carry on, and it's wonderful. Actually, I'm going to show this photo. It's kind of probably hard to see, but a picture of Maria and several other young women back in those days, and when she was there. So Maria, how long did you stay at KBBF?
Well, I started as a volunteer in 1975. I think it was 1978 when what happened, how I actually got into radio. I was pushed into radio because I was a volunteer, very active volunteer. I was on the board of directors, and then, as so often happens with community organizations, there were money troubles, right? And so the station had run out of money, and most of the paid staff, all of the paid staff quit, right? And there was a lot of volunteers still, like myself, but very few that had the third-class radio operator's license that you needed to sign the logs, right? So I had taken my test, and so at that point, I was a student at Sonoma State University, and also working at the social service department. And I asked for a leave from the social service department to be able to help KBBF during this crisis, and it was denied. And so I quit my job to come and save KBBF. And so, and later I wrote a grant to the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. And it was, I don't know whether you had one of those, they were called the CPB Women's and Minorities Training Grants, and they paid half the salary. So I at least had half a salary for some time. And that's
about
how
$2 an hour, $3 an hour. I don't know, whatever it was then. You know, I think at that point, what year was that? 70s?
That was not, but probably 79.
79. So I think I was, well, I had left KPFA by that point and was at NPR, I think, or
Yeah.
on my way back to to
Yes,
the
you
NFA.
you paved the way for people like myself. Yeah.
Well, thank you, thank you. You know, it's those days were, and I think it's important for people to understand. And by the way, if you've just joined us on Peggy's Place this morning, you may recognize that voice and say, "I think I know that voice." Well, you do. That's the voice of Maria Martin, an award-winning journalist. You hear her quite often on National Public Radio. She also, and we're going to get to this in just a minute, she was the visionary who started Latino USA. And I think mentioning those early days, 1978, 79, we may have met when you came, I think, to Washington, D.C. to specialized audience programs to produce a program, perhaps where I was already working at that point. And I even think was Enfoque Nacional already on the air, one of the
Yes.
precursors to, well, not a precursor to Latina USA, because Latina USA is in English, but Enfoque was Spanish. And
Yes, yes, indeed. And Foque Nacional, I do believe, also went on the air around 78, 79, created by alumni also of KBBF. So KBBF really has been the granddaddy of so many projects and careers for Latinos in public radio. I was also trying to remember right before we went on the air, Peggy, when we met, and I wasn't quite sure, but perhaps I think it was at one of the conferences of the National Federation of Community Broadcasters that might have been it. And already you were a legend when I was just starting off.
well, wow, if I was a legend then, I don't know what that makes me now. But you know, I was thinking about that too. And I believe you may be thinking about the Minority Radio Producers Conference, which I actually
Perhaps.
helped NFCB produce. And it was an early attempt because when I learned how to do radio, I wanted to see armies of women and people of color. It was just the easiest thing to do, I thought, doing radio and of course being able to contribute to the news. And I've never been a mainstreamer. That's just my own quirk. But for people who wanted to mainstream, we wanted to make sure they had the skills and let them go forth and do it. And so we did, and that was a wonderful conference, and one of the only that really was from our perspectives, and it brought together a lot of people. So I think you may be right. It might have been at that conference. And Maria and I can tell you that this love of radio and producing, you've probably found out, like I did, that it's not for everybody. As easy as it is, it's not that easy. You're gonna crack up. But this weekend, we had an opening. We have the thing called the Pay and Take here. It's like a big rummage sale, and it's got 4 different rooms. And little by little, they've been opening up. There's a book room, and there's a clothing room, and then the sort of kitchen electronics and linen room opened this weekend. And people were so excited. So what did I do? 9 o'clock on Saturday morning, I went down there with my microphone and talked to people and brought it back, edited it, a little 5-minute piece, but it takes 2 hours to do all of that,
Of course, radio is very, time consuming. When I started for a little while doing print pieces, I was just so amazed at how easy it was. You just go out there, get the stuff, and start writing. And in radio, there's just very many steps. You transcribe the tape, you choose the best cut, the best bites, the best ambience, to set the scene. And it is a very creative process. And I think that's probably why we continue to do it. I don't know if that's the same for you, but that's why I continue to do it, even though it takes so many hours. There's one piece that I've been working on, a profile of an Indigenous woman who has been a pioneer in, opening the way for women, and especially an advocate for the widows and the orphans of Guatemala's long civil war that lasted 36 years, and where the Maya here bore the brunt of all of that violence, and women, especially Mayan women, indigenous women, bore the brunt of that horrible violence that left 200,000 at least people dead, and so many had to flee the country, etc. So I've been working on this profile. I've been working on this profile since June, right?
Of course. And at one point, the piece that's either been there and you didn't see it will be the piece like a puzzle where it all comes together,
Or you're hoping it comes together and then somebody says, redo it.
Oh, we haven't even talked about the role of editors in one's life and how important they are. Well, I want to get back to when you did go to, and I'm maybe making this up, but I think when you went to NPR that first time to produce a documentary, and that was where I worked, that may have become when you got the vision. And on chapter 11, we have here Connecting Continents, a Vision for Latino USA. And there's Maria and a couple of other women. Is that when you got the vision
for the vision for Latino USA?
Yes.
Well, I think I've always had the vision. I remember when I was working at KBBF and was just trying my hand out in producing. It came from listening to what I heard and from listening to NPR, and for a little while I thought I had created this was before Morning Edition became a news magazine. It was just segments, they and so I thought, oh, wouldn't it be great to just have like a half an hour with all kinds of little reports? I didn't know that was a news magazine, right? And it was called Mañana is Now.
Mañana is Now.
And sometimes, in the olden days before digital editing, you'd have to physically cut the tape and then splice it with a specific kind of Scotch tape, basically. But we were so poor. Sometimes we didn't do that. Sometimes I had to use masking tape.
Oh my God, there must have been a little dropout when it went across the heads.
Well, sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. Anyway, so Mañana is Now. I had reports out in Guatemala and reports on, the healthcare system in Sonoma County, and interviews with, cultural workers in Sonoma County. So I think, I've always kind of had that vision, and I was always just a little, and then of course, Enfoque Nacional did it in Spanish very well. But for many reasons, then it was dropped by NPR, and then there was some questioning by the Hispanic caucus of the Congress to National Public Radio about what were they doing for the Latino audience in the wake of the end of Enfoque Nacional. And so then NPR came up with this idea that was kind of, I think, meant to fail. It was NPR's Latin file.
Oh my gosh! Yes,
right?
Yes.
So I came to work at on a temporary basis to NPR's Latin file, and then NPR dropped it after a while, and then some of the Latinos working at NPR, including Elaine Salazar, who was then the director of training, came up with this idea for, because as you and I have heard many times from mainstream public radio, that they wanted to mainstream these issues, but then the kind of deciding factor, the editors were not mainstreamed, right? They were not diverse, and so there was still an issue with getting programming and employment of a diverse workforce. So without a diverse workforce, especially in decision-making positions, one cannot have a main programming
Absolutely.
that
Yeah.
is diverse.
You know, you're absolutely right, and I've been thinking a lot about that time, and you know, frankly, I don't think it's changed all that much, to be honest about it. Even though there's, I don't know what they are, race file now or something like that to, you know, sort of bring it up to date, and that was the important, an important era, and you know, I often think about it as the othered NPR that people like you and myself worked in and fought to get those programs on the air. And of course, you know, you've got not only the editors and why it became so important to become an editor, why it became so important to get into those boardrooms where the funding takes place. All of those things were so important. And and the stories, the importance of culture in the stories. I remember at one point, and you'll appreciate this, I don't know if I ever told you this, but was when I was working at NPR, and we were not allowed to go on the second floor where the news was. We were sort of segregated up on the fourth floor and underfunded.
Right.
And so I was downstairs on the second floor, and I ran into the head of news then, who shall remain nameless, and he said to me, well, Peggy, you know, there'll never come a time when women can cover women's issues and Blacks can cover Blacks issues and Native Americans can cover Native American issues. And so I just looked at him and I said, then why do you have white men covering Congress? And he, of course, turned and walked away from me. But, you know, that kind of attitude. And to some degree, that type of bias is still there. They always tell us, well, you're going to be biased. But, you know, bias, once you choose a story, you're biased. I don't want to go into journalism and how I think about it, but you know, that ability to do what you've done, what came into becoming Latino USA, and you were with it for about, I think, 10 or 11 years, you know, and then you left, and of course, Maria Hinojosa is now known as Latina USA, and doing, you know, they're doing a great job, but it's still the only one. It's the only one. And that's the way the funding works. There can be one of each kind, and it's not even of each kind. The Asian Pacific Islanders have fought for decades within public broadcasting. I've been on many funding panels in the past where there was no Asian Pacific Islander news shows allowed because of mistrust, bias, whatever. So, you know, I just want hats off to you for Latino USA, and, you know, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yes, no, just to add to your point, it's not a bias, it's an understanding, and it doesn't mean that only Latinos could cover Latino issues, of course, no, but I think that, and certainly in the early days, that we brought an extra understanding. It's a beat, just like someone who's an expert on sports or an expert on health. You know, that's a good person to hire for those beats, right? And so many people have come through the ranks of Latino USA. I not only Latino reporters, but you know, white reporters as well, who were interested in this issue, and who, because of the barriers that existed on other programs, you know, editors who didn't think that these issues were important enough to be given airings, that Latino USA provided that forum. And I remember one station manager in a major California market who shall remain nameless also said to me, no, she would not have Latino USA on the air because it would balkanize the audience. But do other niche programs balkanize the orders? No, it just, here's an opportunity to delve into a segment of the audience that might be interested in these issues. And then you might get other listeners who might not be interested in these issues, but because the program is good, because the program is interesting, the program is well produced, the program brings you information that is not heard on the air in other places, then you grow that audience, and then and you also inform and educate the decision makers, both the editors in that wide realm of public broadcasting, as well as, all the decision makers who listen to public radio. It's a very important medium for in that case.
Exactly. And I'm glad you brought that in, that last sentence you're talking about, educating but informing decision makers, and particularly in the Beltway or in government offices, is so important, that role that people like yourself have been doing. I want to remind you, you're listening to Peggy's Place on KGUA in Wallala. We're at 88.3 FM, the old way, on the radio. We're also streaming at kgua.org. We are on the TuneIn app and radio.garden, the Air Pocket app, which is our app. You can download us and take us anywhere you go in the world. And we're now on YouTube. KGUA has a YouTube channel. Maria, I want to get, and I'm talking with Maria Martin, award-winning journalist, and just one of, I honestly, you can't tell, in case you couldn't tell, one of my dear friends, and have great respect for her work. And she's just one of my favorite voices. I could listen to Maria's voice all the time. I want to go back to your book, page 62, and the first real paragraph, the long story of my time. Could you read that paragraph?
Sure. The long story of my time at Latino USA is one for my next book. Suffice it to say for now that for the 11 years I was its senior producer, we made every attempt to have greater Latin American coverage on the program. We broadly reported immigration, not only from a policy angle, but also with human stories from U.S. communities and from Mexico and Central America. We featured stories from Bolivia, Peru, Cuba, Nicaragua, and other countries. Many of those pieces would go on to win awards. Through this work, time and time again, I was reminded of the gift and the responsibility we had with this half hour of coast-to-coast airtime.
And that's exactly what we've been talking about, the honor and the responsibility of being able to deliver this work, get it delivered, find the people who can do it, and the importance of these stories. And I think here we are in 2021, and that hasn't changed. That hasn't changed at all. We have since seen the rise of Radio Bilingüe, wonderfully, organically, and stations that, like ours, are almost all volunteer. That we're all volunteers because of this. We feel the importance of reaching communities that are not getting the news and information, hearing their own voices, hearing their own stories. It's so important that because, yes, ma'am, go ahead.
I just wanted to say, Peggy, to all the listeners of KGUA, how lucky they are to have a person as committed to the ideals of community broadcasting, of public radio as you. That doesn't always happen, and how maybe to remind people that it takes a certain amount of sacrifice to be so committed sometimes. And so whatever support you can offer to KGUA, to Peggy Berryhill, to this idea of this community radio that is not built by one person. It is, after all, a community. It does take a village. It does take an audience. And so I just wanted to say that, because sometimes I think, I mean, for people like you and me that were the pioneers and faced resistance, and we kept doing it, even though sometimes it was painful, personally and spiritually and emotionally painful. But we came through that and continued to contribute. That to me, doing this work that I do is almost kind of has become, not only the commitment, not only a life purpose, but sometimes even sort of a spiritual practice, because it needs to be done, and that people's voices have to be heard. And that's the only way. Maybe, if public radio had been open to more voices, not just the voices of people of color, but the voices of poor white people, then maybe, who knows, but that we wouldn't have this terrible chasm that we have in this division that we have in this country, because we need to hear from each other and about each other.
Well said. And thank you for the pitch for the station and our community. But absolutely, that is, well, I don't know. It's what drives people like you and me, is that desire to have people's voices heard, to talk with each other. We have a wonderful show here. I'll tell you more about it off air, but KGUA Writers, which we started during COVID. And for an hour, once a week, there's a prompt, simple prompt, 250 words, do a 10-minute free write on this prompt. We now have about 18 regular writers, but we have writers from Budapest. We have had writers from Singapore, from France, from Canada, from all over the United States, although the majority of them are right here at home. They connect in those words. They're not professional writers. They don't, they're just people who want to be connected with other people. I think it's shown an enormous, it's a phenomenon, as Mark Gross, the other producer, calls it. It's a phenomenon that need to share that humanness. We're gonna, I want to keep pushing forward here. I want to move next to, we're talking with Maria Martin about her book, Crossing Borders, Building Bridges, a journalist's heart in Latin America. And I love that, a journalist's heart. And because you moved to Guatemala.
Yes.
Why did you leave the United States and move to Guatemala? I know you spend a fair amount of time here.
Uh-huh. Well, in some ways it was one of those things that was not planned. It's the universe took me here. The program that I had spent 12 years producing had been taken over by an administration that didn't appreciate me, right? And so I had actually left NPR to come to the University of Texas to start the program that became Latino USA, because I wanted to have Latino editorial and administrative control. And then things changed. And so then I found myself here to produce a product in Central America, about Central America, because I thought that the US public needed to understand why the Central American community in the US had grown so much, because of the U.S. involvement in the wars of the 80s. And sometimes I think the U.S. public has a short memory, a span of events. And so that needed to be explained as well. And so I moved here, and in some ways I felt there was sort of an injustice done to me because I wasn't at Latino USA anymore. But I found, what they say, one door closes, another a window opens, right? And that maybe the universe has your best interest in mind. And so here I was able to contribute to, basically I had another career teaching journalists for 10 years, especially journalists in the rural areas, indigenous journalists, people in community radio here. And it brought me back to those days of KBBF. It brought me back to doing radio and instilling in people this love of doing radio, of bringing people's voices out, of that maybe had been kind of erased or pushed to the back burner with all of the politics of diversity and public radio and all of the struggles, that entails so many times. So anyway, so that's been that was my life here for a long time. For many years, it was. I also wanted to report from here, but sometimes this wasn't seen as a place of interest. Only when there are big disasters, when there are migration crises, then that. And so for a while, I actually stopped reporting. But when Mr. Trump was elected, I saw that the migration crisis was just going to intensify, and that migrants were going to be demonized, or they were going to be demonized more, and that the context of the situation here had to be explained. So I just just decided I'm going to report on this and knock on all the doors until maybe then my pieces can be heard.
Well, you're making a great contribution, perhaps not in maybe in the grander way you would like, but it is grand. But I think there are other cultural stories you're saying that you would like to share as well. But responding to the crisis at the borders is so absolutely important to help Americans understand, because people have been so demonized, and our hearts are, one thing that's important is our hearts have been breaking for the children.
Yeah. It's such a sad situation. I mean, you just can't imagine the poverty that there is in these communities. That if you were in those people's shoes and your children were starving and you saw that your government didn't care a fig about you, as a matter of fact, saw you as less than, and that's certainly the case with all of the indigenous people who leave, and that is more and more, a greater percentage of, certainly in Guatemala, of the migrants. I mean, that if you were in their shoes, you would leave also. You would leave also. You would have no other choice, because there is very little hope. I'm hoping that that perhaps this time around, and then and the role of the U.S. is so important in this, and you have to understand the historical context of what happened in the 80s and the U.S. interference in Latin America over decades and decades and decades, especially in the 1980s when they were backing horrible governments, right? And so they destabilized these countries. So the end of the wars did not automatically mean that democracy had come to Central America, and then you've had administrations that have, tried to make democracy and the rule of law to try to strengthen them, but you've also had sometimes the same administrations supporting, coup d'etats against democratically elected governments, as in Honduras, right? That ushered in an era of making a bad situation even worse, right? So all of these things have to, need to be explained, and sometimes I try to do it often in 40-second spots. But anyway, I do what I can. In Spanish, there's a saying, tu granito de arena, your little tiny contribution, your little tiny grain of sand, you do what you can with that, and hope there are sometimes open ears and open hearts and minds to that. And I did want to mention that one of the programs that had to do with migration and with corruption that I produced with the help of other people at Reveal, and that aired last September. It's going to re-air, I do believe, on the 10th of April.
Okay.
And so that program, I think, touched people because we told the story of this one migrant family who the father and the young son went to the border, and they were separated for many months, etc. And some people, and now the family was back, and it was a happy thing that the family was reunited, but their financial situation, their economic outlook was just dire, because this man had taken out a loan, that he had no hopes of paying back. And some listeners donated to this family, and we were
Oh, you're frozen. We're listening to Maria Martin, award-winning journalist living in Antigua, Guatemala now. And move your head so I can see if you're unfrozen. I don't think you're unfrozen yet, Maria. She's back. This wonderful time in talking about the stories that she reports on it, and that story on Reveal that we'll have to see if we can get access to, but so absolutely important. I don't even know if you know this, but in the early 70s, I was reporting on Guatemala and Ecuador and Uruguay on a bilingual newspaper, the only one of its kind. And that was before the rainforest even existed. That's a PR term, it was still called the jungle. And we were reporting on what was going on then, and now that's come to complete fruition of the destruction of the forest and disease and everything else that's going on, and with all of that. And it was, and in the 70s you could still get Indian hunting licenses in Uruguay and in Paraguay in the 70s. So that's how what the indigenous people's lives were worth then, and barely a little more than that now, because you don't get paid to kill people. It's
you kill them in other ways.
You kill them in other ways. We're going to run out of time here. I don't know if we're going to get to Sister Diane Ortiz's story, one of your many award-winning stories here. And in the book, there's also, Maria has a YouTube about a story about her book. And should we play a little bit of that?
Sure.
Okay, because I want people to read your book. And I have so many windows here. I think it's this one. And if I play this, they'll be able to see the YouTube here.
I was about 6 when I heard we were moving north. The children are becoming too Mexican, said my Irish American father. And so we took the train to Nogales, away from Irapuato, Guanajuato, and Monterrey, Nuevo León, away from the land of mis abuelos, Pedro Garcia and Guadalupe Rios de Garcia. We were going to a place where they only speak English, to the land of my father, Charles McGlynn Martin, who'd come south to study on the GI Bill and to get away from cold Chicago winters. And he found Adela Garcia. I was frightened about the move for me and for my mother. So many small children to take care of. Johnny's just born, Frank is 2, and Maria Cristina, named in Spanish like me, is not yet 4. Nacho is older. Maybe for him, this move was even harder. I only knew a few words of English. My father reads to me after dinner. In the new school in Nogales, Arizona, they punish you if you speak Spanish. I quickly learned not to do it. I quickly learned to negotiate the many borders I was constantly crossing.
I'm going to stop it there so we have some time to talk. I want people to know you can look this up on YouTube, and it's Maria's story with her book title on it. And I'm happy we sort of stopped at this border picture because, you know, I think that people forget there was a time, like when you were young and another generation, when people from both sides of the borders played. They got home from school, they played soccer, they played baseball together. Families were families together. It wasn't that big separation like it is now. How do you, you know, how is the book doing, Maria? How is this doing?
I'm not sure to tell you the truth. I'm not.
You didn't do it to get rich.
Well, I did it, you know, on the personal level, just to tell my story, because I think not that it's so unique, but it's the story of so many people like yourself who were, you know, pioneers, and that there are lessons from my story that perhaps can help young journalists, that can help young wannabe change makers, right? That perhaps I wish I'd known when I was trying to create these changes, and that could have helped me to do it from the perspective of empowerment, rather than from feeling weak or oppressed or a victim or hurt when you know there was resistance, or things didn't go my way, or I was attacked, or I was fired, or I was whatever, ousted, or whatever. All of these things happen. So I think that was the reason why I wrote it. Certainly, one wants to make an impact, and I'm you know, I invite people to you know, read the book. I think that it's would be interesting for classes to consider some of these things, and you know, I think we all want our lives to have some kind of meaning, and sometimes, as you in your writers group knows, you know, that writing things down, writing stories down, it's not only catharsis, but then you're able to see your life in a different manner, and you go, well, you know, maybe I did give my little granito de arena.
Oh, more than that, Maria. And I think we don't even know it. And I think you're right. I think it has a great use in the classroom, And those barriers, those challenges that we went through, I mean, they're still there, maybe not to the extent that we did, because, you know, we each did it in our own way. I often say that, you know, my dear friend Susan Brain and I, that we kicked the doors open for Native radio because we had to. And sometimes you had to take that kind of really strong stance to open the doors, and not just for myself, but for women and people of color. And in now, I mean, I think, you know, some of that these generations are not familiar with. It's important to understand it wasn't that so long ago, and things are still not, in my opinion, all that great, but they're a heck of a lot better than they were. And we have some wonderful things that are happening beyond public radio, TV, and films, and wonderful stuff that's going on that we envisioned. Oh my God, well, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, our communities will be doing this. And so that's what we also hope for the people who are coming to the border, that there will be a way of getting away from just surviving, you know, just surviving. And you and I've met so many of those challenges. So, you know, we're almost out of time, but I've been talking this morning with Maria Martin, wonderful journalist, award-winning journalist, producer, teacher, educator, doing a lot of work, important work still. And I was talking with another friend of ours, Loretta Hobbs, the other day, and she says, well, you know, we're all at that age when we think of legacy. And so your book is out. It's very important. My book is in process. You know, Donna Limerick. I talked to Donna Limerick the other day. I got a hold of her out of the blue, and she said, well, what have you been doing? I told her, and she said, anyway, she said, get that book out. Get that book out. So all of these things, Maria, we have like 90 seconds. What do you want to say to our audience?
Just let me read 2 or 3 sentences from one of the last paragraphs. That societal transformation is a tough and taxing proposition. I see this everywhere in Latin America, etc. And in politics and the media, the question has always been, who decides the terms of the dialogue? Who sets the rules for the debate? No? So the transformations that began in the 70s are still works in progress in education, police, community relations, and in the media. And so genuine systemic change is something we need to be committed to for the long term if we are to build an America in the sense of a country, a continent, and a world that is peaceful and just.
We will have to continue these conversations, Maria. There was some talk about 3 months ago about America's racial reckoning. I talk about that a lot of time. I get to do whatever I want here at the station. So we talk a lot about that.
But worthwhile,
huh?
That makes it worthwhile.
Yes, it does. And how we do bring that about. And it's not about honoring. I know people like to say, well, we're going to honor this and we're going to honor that. No, how do we really go beyond that? You're one of the people who have shown that through your work, through your dedication. And we look forward to hearing your voice more. And I think we're just going to have to figure out how we can have you on maybe monthly or something and give us an update from Latin America. And I think it would be so meaningful to our audience. And here in our little community, you know, we are about 1/3 Latinx. I'm out of time, as always. I got to run. I got to go to Albuquerque, New Mexico for Native America Calling. Maria, it's been a pleasure. Love you. And,
thank you.
All right.
Thank
and
you.
Don't forget
Thank
about
you,
this,
everybody.
the book.
KGUA. Hasta
Thank
luego.
you.